Husbands and wives that got divorced after 20 years of marriage. What made you decide to change your mind after all that time? Story 1. Had to watch my parents go through the paperwork to get divorced after my dad had a massive stroke and was forced to retire. It was the only way for them to keep the money from his pension and maintain his health insurance coverage. My parents got a divorce of convenience so Pops could make the mortgage payments and get his insulin. Thankfully, my parents' insurance agent is a close friend and found every possible form and loophole so they could stay in the house together. It took almost 2 years to get everything settled. I'll never forget my dad's statement after it was all done. The church still says we're married, and that's what matters to us. At least now your mother can still get her hearing aids and pay the mortgage if something happens to me. I was so disgusted with it all. I never forgave my dad's union for it, and we now make sure someone from our family shows up to their annual open meeting when they discuss the health insurance plan to shame them in explicit detail with how the board fudge over the roughnecks. Story 2. 23 years. I had lied to her several times over the years, and she always forgave me. The last time I lied to her about accruing a severe amount of debt due to a gambling addiction. I think she might have forgiven the lie, but she couldn't forgive the addiction and the chance I'd start gambling again. I started attending Gamblers Anonymous after I told her, but it was too little too late for her. On the plus side, I haven't gambled in almost 3 years. Edit, I wanted to thank everyone for the support. It was a struggle at first, but it gets easier as long as I take it one day at a time. I've made some amazing friends in my local recovery community, and I run a meeting once a week to help others that are suffering. Story 3. There's a guy in my town that everyone knows about because he owns this huge jerk mansion in a middle-class neighborhood. Apparently, he was married to a woman for a long time, but she left him calling him a loser because his business hadn't taken off yet. After she left him, his business finally took off. He sells medical equipment to hospitals, and he became fudge you levels of rich in a few years. The reason he built the mansion in that neighborhood was because that is where she lives, so she has to drive by the mansion on her way to work every day. Story 4. My mom filed for divorce after 27 years with my dad. Us kids were out of the house, and I think she had a midlife crisis thinking that if she decided to do nothing, then that's how she'd die. In that house, doing nothing but things that make the days go by faster. I do believe an old high school flame helped her make the decision as well. At first, I was hurt, but as I get older now, I completely get why. My dad prefers routine over excitement and had a habit of saving us poor when we didn't need to. At first, it was a financial requirement. Then it became obsession. My mom wanted to travel and experience new things in her later years. She deserves that, and my dad deserves to live how wants to too. Today, I see 2 happier people, and that makes me happy. Story 5. My parents got divorced after 22 years of marriage. They were never in love and didn't even like each other. They had me and then my sister a few years later and wanted to stay together for the kids. Some years after I was born, they had my brother, and that kept the cycle going. I wish I could say they are happy now, but they still like to cause trouble for each other. We're due with our first child soon, and they're going to have to figure out how to be grandparents together. Thankfully, I'm 1,500 miles from them, so it won't be a headache often. Story 6. I worked at a law firm that only practiced family law, divorces, child custody, wills, estates, etc. At one time, we had like 8 clients getting divorced after 20 years of marriage, and they were all high-ranking military men whose wives came out of the closet after all their kids had grown up and moved out of the house, and the guys were getting ready to retire. I thought it was so weird, but I guess for whatever reason, the women thought that their duties to their husbands and families were coming to an end, and they wanted to live for themselves. I guess I know why they couldn't come out 30 years ago. It was a different time, but I was curious why they were all attracted to military guys. I assume maybe because it meant their husbands would be away for years at a time during their service. Answer, I am one of those women who in my 40s discovered that I was gay. I married super young and was in a very strict religious system. My husband and I got along well for the most part, but he was always emotionally disconnected. When we got to the place where the kids were grown, I asked myself if I would be happy living with this man, just the 2 of us, for the next 30 years. After therapy and a lot of conversations, the answer was no. I've always had the niggling that I was attracted to women, so I decided to start dating. My first relationship with a woman was incredible. The emotional connection was like nothing I'd ever experienced. I'm single now, but I have no intention of going back to dating men, ever. My ex-husband of 20 years and I have managed to remain friends. Story 7. My parents split up after nearly 30 years. My dad was in jerk my entire life, so when they finally divorced when I was 18, there was no surprise. He'd been cheating for years, and I think he was the one who finally asked for it. I think my mom stayed because she couldn't afford to start over. She spent her life putting my dad through school and wasn't educated herself. She had no family or anyone who could help her either. There was definitely some confidence issues on her part too. Story 8. My husband began surreptitiously going to strip clubs. He stole about $200 a week from various accounts in a business I owned to fund these activities. He lost his job because he went there so often at lunch and would just stay. We had young kids, and so I stayed after he got some therapy. He was never honest with the therapist. About a year ago, I learned he was doing it again, plus texting strippers. My youngest kid graduates high school this year. I've done what's best for everyone else for 20 years now. This September was 21 years. I don't anticipate having a 22nd anniversary. It's really scary to think of being alone. I don't dislike him. I feel sorry for him. I know he will feel very sad and lonely when I'm gone. But being near him feels like having my soul ripped from my body every day. Story 9. Therapy changed my mind. After more than a decade of being miserable, I finally got help. When I was able to really talk about my marriage was when I realized that I needed to get the fudge out. At the end of the day, I stayed in a shoot marriage because the thought of being alone scared me. Through therapy, I was clued into how many wonderfully supportive friends and family members I had if I just reached out to them. I wasn't going to be in a relationship anymore, but I wasn't alone either. Answer. It's word, but I'm experiencing this ATM with my wife. She's gone through CBT and has now decided she's unhappy with our marriage setup. I admire her for doing it, but at the same time it's infuriating because half of long-drawn assertions are based on her own reflective comments to herself and not to others. I don't disrespect her for this, but it's hard discussing half-truths that are not validated. As an evil husband on the other side of this, are there any olive branches you think I can use to help heal things? I do love her with all my heart, but it's heartbreaking going through this. Edit. P.S. This is possibly the best question asked so far here. Story 10. Not myself, but my parents. They were married for 22 years when they separated. 24 years by the time the divorce was final. From the perspective of a child in the situation, there was no way that they were happy people together. There was hardly ever a quiet moment in the house because of my father's temper, but my mother knew how to serve it back too. However, the final straw was more of a chain of events. My father had a very rigid view of the family. Man works, woman stays home, cares for the home and children. When I was in high school, my father got injured at work and needed surgery. He worked a physically demanding job and would be out for 6 months. My mother, knowing that we were already falling behind on vehicle and house payments, decided to find part-time employment. She worked while the kids were in school. It was still important to her to see her kids get on the bus and be there when they got home. My father immediately believed that she was cheating on him. He installed a tracker and tape recorder in her car. He showed up at her workplace and caused a scene multiple times. He questioned her coworkers. He spent most of time at the house drinking. This was not an equal partnership, and it really never was. You should have seen how hurt he acted when my mom finally asked for a divorce. But he rebounded real quick. All he had to do was tell some woman on Plenty of Fish his sob story, and he moved right into her house. He spent a couple of years treating her and her children horribly before she kicked him out. Only took him a couple of weeks in a hotel to find another woman to let him move in. Answer. Sounds like my grandpa, except when he started drinking and accusing grandma of cheating, he beat the shoot out of her. It all backfired one day, though. Grandpa had 7 sons, all really good wrestlers and boxers, because grandpa thought men should know how to fight. One day they ganged up on grandpa. They were 8 to 17, beat the shoot out of him, tied him up to a tree, and left him outside all night. Then they told him they'd eliminate him if he ever drank or hit grandma again. It's crazy to my because I only ever got to meet the nice version of my grandpa who didn't drink. Story 11. Parents divorced after 25 years when my mom had what we thought at the time was a midlife crisis. She told my dad by draining $3,000 from the joint checking account to fund her divorce lawyer. 6 years later, they were officially divorced since she blew through that money on different lawyers that kept firing her as a client. We later ruled out midlife crisis when her behavior started to become more odd, erratic, and paranoid. She was in her early 50s when this behavior started. Now we, myself and my sister-in-law with psychology experience, think she has late onset bipolar, and I say think since we can't get her officially diagnosed since she believes nothing is wrong with her. She lives in NY, and it is super hard to commit someone there unless they are a danger to themselves or other people. She's not dangerous, just can't hold down a bomb and lives in her car due to her own insubordinate, sporadic, paranoid behavior, but blames everyone else. No, she's not a narcissist, just mentally ill since she was never like this when we were growing up. She was very selfless and caring when she was younger. Edit. Hi, Redditors. Thanks for sharing all your stories. I'm sorry if I couldn't respond to everyone. Ironically, I was just fielding my mom's texts and calls about her most recent job firing this morning on my birthday. I hope everyone who shared a story has an easier time going forward, since that's what I hope this new year brings us as a family. Answer: totally just an anecdote, but I heard a similar story from a friend of a friend. The mother in that situation seemed to be going through a midlife crisis. Then they thought it was a late onset mental illness, but then in the end it turned out to be a brain tumor that completely changed her personality. It was a sad story. She didn't make it. But as sad as it was, it brought much relief to the husband and children that there was a reasonable explanation for all of the hurt they went through while she appeared to go off the deep end. Story 12. We were together for 20 years, married for 15. We started as high school sweethearts, but we eventually realized that we weren't the same people we were when we fell in love. We also realized that that wasn't going to change. We decided that the best way for everyone to be happy for the rest of our lives was to end it on peaceful terms before we were both 70 and resentful of each other for trapping each other in an unhappy marriage for 40 years. Answer: similar story here. Started dating at 17, got married way too young. By our 30s, we were completely different people. At 40, I asked myself, can I do this for the rest of my life? And realized the answer was no. We both have new lives now, and eventually each found new partners and are much happier. I think the second time around, especially when you're older, you know exactly what you want and what you are or aren't willing to put up with. Story 13. I will be one of the few that speaks from experience. I have been married 20 years, and we are on the edge. The answer is that life changes you. When you start out, the relationship is its own thing. It is cultivated and grows. Then over the years, add some children and full-time jobs, and there is less time to cultivate or none. You end up becoming life partners to run the household and wonder why you are even together. Since there are no good times, all that is left are arguments and bad times. This is all normal. And on top of that, you are both going through the personal struggles of living. To be honest, staying married is tougher than most people think in an age without divorce social stigma. The kids do keep you together, hoping somehow you can rekindle something that once existed. And this is in a situation with two good people trying to do the right thing and not a toxic situation with abuse. Answer: I think the opposite is true of kids. They make marriage less likely to work. My wife and I have been together for almost 20 years, but he only recently had a kid. Things were easy and happy until parenthood. We'd stay up late, play video games, watch movies, sleep in on weekends, and just generally do whatever the hell we wanted. It was awesome. Kids are just so much work, so much stress, and my wife and I have much less time for each other. I love my son dearly, but I went from feeling really close to my wife to feeling like we've barely spoken in months. Life is just unrecognizable now. My wife has been my best friend for decades, and I feel so lost and alone all the time, even though I work from home, and she's rarely more than a few hundred feet away from me. Story 14. Obligatory, not me. My parents. My dad filed for divorce after 25 years of marriage. My mom was shell-shocked. My dad was absolutely miserable, but the signs of a failed marriage were always present. My dad is very emotional and is quick to anger. He never really handled failure very effectively and would be met instead of constructive. My mom very family-oriented and was adamant that we never move farther than 40 miles from Chicago. Hell, when I was going away to college, she bawled to my dad to force me to go to a school closer to home. In a way, I think my dad resented my mom for never letting him travel or get away from Chicago. It also doesn't help that I'm fairly certain my mom become undiagnosed, depressed once her mom died. All she would do was do her bare minimum at her job, a school bus driver, come home and sleep, finish her route for the day, cook a hamburger helper meal for the family, and then play Angry Birds on her iPad. It's really weird seeing your parents divorce and you're adult enough to speak candidly, and neither of them likes what you have to say about them during or after the fact. The silver lining out of it is my sisters, and I know how not to behave in a relationship. Answer: that last paragraph resonates with me. My parents did the same thing. Dad saying he wanted to separate 3 months before my wedding even. It's been almost 10 years at this point, and my sister and I still don't really know why. We understood that it wasn't completely our business, but Dad kept getting pissed that we were hurt by it. Like the fact that Sis and I were both in our 20s meant we didn't have a right to have upset feelings. Story 15. Not me, but my grandmother once told me that she was considering divorcing her husband of over 50 years. The reason she gave me was, we stayed together for the kids. Now the kids are all grown up and have lives of their own. And now I can't ignore the small things about him, my grandpa, that annoy me. She didn't go through with it, but she seemed sincere when she said it. It broke my heart, especially since I only ever saw the best side of him. Thank you for the silver, kind stranger. Story 16. We were together for 20 years, but only married for 13 of them. Our interests just diverged over the years. I got more into music and art, wanted to go to festivals and such, and she wanted to fudge her boss. I'm very grateful our attempts to have kids failed. It's much, much easier to make a clean break that way. Story 17. Not me, but a lady I worked with. Her and her husband had been married for almost 30 years. They had 2 kids, both in their mid-late teens, and a full life together. She was the stay-at-home mom. He made the big bucks, etc. Anyways, once the kids both started to grow up and stopped wanting to go to the cottage, they realized that when left alone together, they didn't have much in common. Then the kids started leaving for school, and I guess things got worse. I think everything would have been fine if not for the father's dad, the grandfather, getting sick. Turns out the old man had near $4 million to his name and was giving it all to the father. So dad consults a lawyer who says that since it's an inheritance, if he's divorced before he gets it, he can keep all of it. And as such, he divorces her within days. She stopped working for us shortly after, but I know it was pretty hard on her. She got her fair shake of the currently owned assets, but couldn't touch the $4 million. Story 18. My grandparents initiated divorce proceedings a month after my dad, the youngest of his siblings, graduated college. They had stayed together to provide a stable home for their children, and once they'd all left the nest, my grandparents were ready to move on. Story 19. My parents intended to separate after 20 or so years. Once my sister and I left the home, Mom got sick and Dad cares for her. They live almost completely separate lives in the same house. I check in their daily BC of my own marriage having gone south and financially ruining me. Story 20. I see a fair amount of these divorces get filed by older folks because one of them has dementia or the like and needs to be moved into a care facility. The couple will file for divorce in order to protect the family assets from getting completely eaten up, and Medicaid takes over the brunt of it. It is pretty sad that our healthcare state is such that it is necessary to take such a step to make sure someone gets the care that they need without destroying the other spouse's ability to care for themselves. Story 21. Before, not my story, my grandparents. They met and married in the 50s. Super Catholic family. 6 kids in 9 years, thereabouts. Husband worked, wife took care of the family dynamic. It was honestly a lot of little things that my grandma eventually got tired of. First, it was trying to wrangle her 3 boys, all with difficult personalities, to church, so they stopped going. Then it was things like not helping with the difficult kids, women's work, not helping with household chores, that's what kids are for, being emotionally distant, he's a man, they don't do emotional shoot, etc. From the way my grandma tells it, she stuck it out so long because she thought that's what a good Catholic woman does. Be long-suffering and patient. It wasn't until she started exploring outside Catholicism that she decided she'd suffered long enough. The divorce ended up being civil and mutual. Grandpa was never one for causing a scene. And both my grandparents ended up in loving, understanding second relationships. Neither remarried officially. Funny random side note, when I graduated high school in 2012, my mother invited both my grandparents to my graduation. By that time, they'd been divorced for longer than they'd been married, 20-odd years together, 30 years divorced, by my math, and didn't even recognize each other until after the ceremony. Story 22. I was married to a wonderful woman for 27 years. 1 daughter, a perfect little family. Then I had an affair, and it broke her heart. We are still good friends, and I see her at least once a week, but I wish I could go back and undo the terrible damage I did. Now I'm 60, I live alone, and all I have left are memories and regrets. Answer. My husband had an affair around our 24th year. He broke my heart, too. We are still together now at 29 years. I'm not sure I'll ever heal from it. Everything has changed. My entire view of the world has changed. Even now, years later, I'm reeling knowing that the person I loved and trusted more than anyone else on earth could and did hurt me so badly. Story 23. 28 years and I lost him to mental illness. I tried for years to get him help, but he refused. He is a genuinely good person and was once an amazing husband and father. I have been divorced over 2 years and still haven't dated anyone because no one will ever compare to the man he was. Smart, romantic, thoughtful, socially conscious, hard worker, etc. That man doesn't exist anymore. I am the one who sought the divorce, but expected him to want to work it out. When he said, "I think that's for the best," I was heartbroken. He lives upstairs from me, Because where would he go? I can't just toss him to the streets, but it does make it harder. I feel more like a widow TBA. Answer, I am so sorry for your loss. You're right that it's more akin to being a widow than a divorcee. Mental illness is such a difficult marital problem to tackle because it's no one's fault, and there's no way to prevent it, plan for it, or fully resolve it. You're a good and strong person for trying so hard, and for living with him as an upstairs neighbor now. I hope that one day you can make peace and move on. You deserve to be happy. Story 24. My parents got divorced because of my dad. We grew up in a military family. Dad was always deployed. My mom is a walking medical disaster. No offense to her. RA at 23, endometriosis at 24, got a hysterectomy and everything. They married early and had kids really early because of the endometriosis. My mom tried to cater to my dad, make sure he could still live his life in his 20s because they had kids earlier than expected. Well, being deployed all the time meant my dad could just fudge around with ladies off in other places. My mom stayed home and took care of us. Dad gets a divorce when he gets back, gets remarried like 3 months later. That lasted like 2 years before she got her green card and ditched him. My mom still loves him, despite him moving on to his third marriage, having another kid, and never actually paying his portion of child support. So pretty much they got divorced so my dad could have a younger, more subservient wife. Story 25. He was a serial cheater. The straw that broke the camel's back was my then 15-year-old daughter having a panic attack and being hospitalized over the guilt she felt for keeping his secret. He had been having an affair with a married woman for a year and had been taking our kids with him to play house with her and her kids while her husband was out of state for work in the oil field. He was using his dying grandfather as cover by claiming to be staying overnights in the hospital with him so he wouldn't be alone and that he was taking our kids with him so they could go home with his mother and get to spend time with their grandparents on that side. He threatened our kids and guilted them into keeping it a secret until my daughter just couldn't handle it anymore, she told me. He called her a lying meanie and a stupid whore, and when she ran to her bedroom to get away from him screaming at her, he chased her and kicked her bedroom door down to get at her for telling. I put him out of my house immediately and divorced him. Also, his entire family knew what he was doing and kept up the sleeping in the hospital with dying grandpa cover for him. He had been taking this woman and her kids to his family functions, and they all welcomed them with open arms. His mother went so far as to also verbally attack my daughter when she told and called her a liar and accused her of stirring up drama for the attention. Story 26. My parents started considering divorce right around that time, but ended up deciding against it. My dad was military and had PTSD from Afghanistan, but it didn't cause problems at home because he was stationed at a base across the state from us, so he was only home on the weekends. When he got restationed and we moved, we all lived in the same house again. His PTSD and my mom's anxiety did not play off of each other well, so they considered divorce but decided to work through it. Story 27. He eliminated the dog. She was getting older, and if left alone for more than 7 hours, she would pee in the basement on the cement. I would check daily and mop if needed, but we were in the process of burying a new house, and he decided she wasn't coming with us. Rather than discussing with me, he took the easy route and made her disappear while I was at work. Having to console my young sons that evening and seeing their trauma was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. My heart closed to him instantly. Answer, that's so fudge up. Many years ago, I saw a Craigslist post about a woman trying to urgently rehome her ragdoll cat because, like a lot of purebred animals, he had some health issues, and specifically, he had a sensitive stomach and vomited almost daily. The woman's husband apparently said if she didn't find a home for the cat in 3 days, he would have it put down. I couldn't keep him permanently, but I wanted to make sure he had a chance at finding a stable home, so I drove like 70 miles out into the suburbs to pick him up. When I got there, the woman had a toddler with her, and she was also heavily pregnant. I couldn't help but think, you chose to reproduce with this guy? Edit. Oh, and the cat was lovely. He was very chatty. It only took me like 2 or 3 days to find a loving home for him. He went to a military spouse who wanted a pet companion while her husband was away on deployment. Story 28. 47 years of marriage, and my wife went off the rails, screaming at me hundreds of times, finally getting me imprisoned in the intake room of the mental health ward in the hospital. Came back home after 48 hours to no car, no dog, and a note saying, can't take any more. Of what? So, at 71, I am alone. Her family does not believe me, and I spent Thanksgiving and Christmas by myself for the first time since we married in 1972. My only hope is that there are more women than men at my age. Apparently, a lot of men die in their 60s. Story 29. My parents have been married 29 years but have been separated since last year, and it's likely heading to divorce if they can afford it. I've been thinking a lot on this. Why give up now? But I think over the years I'm piecing it together. They married in their mid-30s, both after failed marriages with no children. I think they both wanted a normal family life or a legacy to leave. They adopted me, an only child, and honestly I think I had a pretty good childhood, but they never really got along. My dad mostly would hide somewhere around the property, LOL. But as soon as I was out of the house, it turned to slow, devastating turmoil. I don't know if married life, or the one they had at least, was ever going to be their thing, but props to them for trying while they had me. I think they've made this realization now. Story 30. My parents were together for 24 years. My dad left my mom after his best friend, who was 6 years younger than him, died. My dad went into a depression about his own life and left my mom for some meanie at his work because he felt he was missing out on life by being with my mom. Answer: I know what that's like. We've been married for 16 years. My wife lost both her parents just a few months apart a couple years ago. She has since been cheating on me with at least 2 guys, possibly more. Her personality completely changed, becoming a mere shadow of the woman I fell in love with 20 years ago. She's confided in friends that she missed out on a more exciting life because of our marriage, although nobody around us honestly believes that. She cherry picks those times we had those problems every married couple have in order to justify her excuses. She refuses couples counseling, although she has been going on her own to treat her lifelong depression. So who knows what she tells them about us. We have 2 kids that are beginning to resent her for the damage she's doing to our family. That only fuels her anger towards me, as she believes I'm brainwashing them or bad-mouthing her to them, which is absurd. I've always given her the benefit of the doubt and made excuses for her behavior. I'm trying to figure out what to do myself right now. Story 31. This will be a tome, so strap in. So I started the process for several reasons. Together for 20, split for 5 before the papers were finally signed. It was hell. We had a rocky relationship for some time, but a series of things broke the camel's back. First, I caught her cheating with my neighbor, who was my friend. Should have kicked her out then, but I thought I could piece it back together. Her mood went south, and she started popping pills and abusing the kids and I emotionally. Then she attempted to OD while I was on a trip. Found out she was still cheating, and I was about to deploy for an overseas stint. She admitted that she couldn't remain faithful, and she wanted an open relationship. I agreed, told her to sign on the dotted line. We are done. I got the house and kids. Now the kids and I are way happier. There are a ton more gory details, but you get the drift. Reflecting back as I was going through it all, I searched for advice on how to handle things. What I learned was that relationships are about making memories, good ones and bad ones. I read that for a relationship to remain fulfilling, the ratio of good to bad memories ought to be at least 6 to 1. In our case, we were inverted. That is, we had 6 bad memories for every good one. At least. Had I known that, I might not have married her, or at least ended things before kids were in the picture. So if you are evaluating your relationship, look at the memories you've created. Be honest with yourself. Do the good memories vastly outweigh the bad ones? And realize this, adding kids to your lives tends to accentuate things. If you have great things between you, I find kids make them better, more special. But if you have sizable cracks in your relationship, having kids will split them wide open. Not because kids in themselves are bad, but for the reason the cracks are there is you are not best friends, partners, leaning equally on each other as a team. Thus, the huge stress of raising kids will expose that weakness tenfold. If your relationship is a strong one, kids will bring you together, and you will all relish building great memories together and easily weather stormy seas when they do occur. Just my point or two. And then some. Edit. Oh yeah, never get married and have kids young, say under 27. You have no clue who you are or what your real goals in life are till at least 25, if not later. You will change dramatically after college and that first job. Do yourself a favor and explore while you are young. Travel. Find hobbies. Love. Break up. Love again. Buy a car. Pay bills. Learn how to support yourself. Figure out what makes you happy. And figure out what annoys you. And if you do all that with another person, then maybe that is the one for you. Edit 2, the tome continues. Don't form a relationship where you are rescuing your mate. That will end up in disaster. That's where I went wrong ultimately. My ex was in many ways, and still is, very much attached to her parental units by a very thick umbilical cord. I felt I could get her free of that, but I was mistaken. She said she wanted away from them, but she really didn't want that at all. It was impossible to form any sort of real bond with her parents providing constant help for everything. The goal should be for you and your spouse to start a new family, not merge two existing ones. Otherwise, you will still be children in their eyes and your spouse, and you will not respect each other. The cornerstones for a strong marriage are love, respect, trust, and admiration. When you share those with your life partner, then you will compete with each other to see who can make the other happier. Nirvana. Story 32. She realized that she never truly loved me and that she was a lesbian in love with one of our oldest friends. 24 years together, 19 years of marriage, 2 kids, pets, cars, friends in common, got thrown up in the air. She wanted to leave, and I was the one trying to keep our family together. Frustratingly painful. Maybe I always had been. She left one night and suddenly I was a single father, explaining the harshness of life to my crying children and trying to convince them everything would be okay. She started the legal process and I reluctantly had to participate. It is difficult to get divorced and not let it become ugly once the process starts. The children end up right in the middle of it all spectators oblivious to the plays being called, but clearly watching the game play out on the field whether we realize it or not. Parenting plans lead to visitations and kids wishing things were the way they used to be. You learn to be an individual again, and it's absolutely terrifying at first, but it leads to, at least in my case, realization that more life awaits with people who genuinely want to be part of it with you. I don't wish divorce on anyone, especially when children are in the families. The emotional scars run deep and never truly heal. I will champion my children to discover who they are first and to do what they love to do. I now think most people get married too early in life, and it leads to regret and longing for opportunities missed for some. Story 33. My grandparents got divorced after 27 years of marriage. They were forced to get married after my grandmother got pregnant in college. 6 children later, and an overbearing husband were too much for her to deal with, and she started going out on him and seeing guys at bars. They got divorced after the 6th kid graduated high school. My grandfather met a nice lady at church the next year and got remarried. My grandmother married a guy she met at the bar. Both of my step-grandparents died long before my grandparents did, but they couldn't stand each other and wanted nothing to do with each the rest of their lives. Story 34. This is a post about my parents. My parents divorced when I was in my early 30s after more than 3 decades of being married. My parents still speak to one another, and when my parents are in a city with their former in-laws, they make it a point to visit those in-laws. My parents started dating when my mom was 14 and my dad was 16, and both sides of my family would gather regularly during the holidays when both sets of my grandparents were still alive. I love both of my parents, and I speak to both of them semi-regularly. With that being said, this is going to be a very one-sided point of view in favor of my mom. I'm sure my mom has her own portion of the blame, but from my point of view, my dad holds more of the responsibility. My dad was always a difficult person. His humor is crass, but he was and still is always helping people when he can. In 2004, he had a cerebral hemorrhage. We weren't sure he was going to survive. First, the doctors said if he survived, he'd be a vegetable. Then as his healing progressed, the outcome steadily got better. What didn't get better was him being a jerk. During his years of recovery, my mother tried her best. But during this time, we lost our 2 businesses and the home they built. My dad blamed my mom for all of this, and when she had had enough of taking his blame, she left him. Story 35. Not 20, but my parents divorced after 13 years of marriage. They divorced due to my mom's affair, but still continued living together for the kids. We were young when they divorced, but they never moved apart, and we all grew up in one household. After they divorced, they lived more like roommates than anything, and got along better than they ever did as a married couple. They still shared all expenses relating to us, and since my dad made more, he would spot her often. I can't remember them having a single argument after the divorce happened. When my mom was diagnosed with cancer this year, my dad was her caretaker. He would drive her to appointments, change her bandages every 3 days, cook her meals. When we went out, he would go grab the car so she wouldn't have to walk too far. When she was stuck in the hospital, he visited her every day. When she died 2 months ago, he paid for her entire funeral. He was her ex-husband that she cheated on, and he still gave her everything. Divorce was probably the best thing they could have done, yet in a lot of ways they were still married. It taught me a lot about the importance of caring for another person when they really need you, even when they've hurt you badly. My dad did so much for my mom despite his own feelings. It also taught me a lot about how making a bad choice doesn't make you a bad person. My mother made a mistake, yet she was the greatest woman I've ever known. I'm insanely lucky to have called her my mom. We had an incredibly unusual home life, but I wouldn't change it for anything. Story 36. Not me, but my wife's parents divorced after about 20 years of marriage. Her dad was an abusive alcoholic, but her mom stayed with him for the children. As soon as my wife was off to college, her mom finally left him. My wife disliked living with her abusive and alcoholic father, and had wanted her mom to leave her dad for years. She's assumed her mother was scared or something, and that's why she never left. But when her mom finally did leave, she learned her mom wasn't scared at all to leave him, but had purposely kept him around because a kid needs a father and the idea that you should stay together for the kids. It wasn't too long before her mom married a new guy who is really great. And my wife is really resentful towards her mother and her fudge-up logic where she purposely kept an abusive alcoholic in the house while my wife was growing up, only to marry a great guy after my wife had left home. Story 37. My parents were together for 30 years before they got divorced. They are also 15 years apart in age. My dad is older. And from what my family says, they never should have gotten married because when it comes time for my dad to retire, my mom will resent him for it. My dad kept saying he had a plan to go out and be active once he did retire, but all he wanted to do is sit down, watch TV, and drink. He never ended up doing anything. While doing this, his health declined very rapidly. He had always been in decent shape, and it got to the point where he needed a walker. My mom started to resent him in full force and took it out on everyone. My family started to drift, and it came to a breaking point when my dad had a stroke and refused to get PT to get back to normal. They got divorced a year after that happened, and it was the best decision they could made. My mom is finally happy, but my dad is still going downhill. Just this year, we had to put him in a 24-hour nursing home because he had another stroke and doesn't have function of his right side anymore. Take care of yourselves, kids. Story 38. Not 20 years of marriage, only 16, but 21 years together with my ex. We both had a non-loving home situation, so maybe this drove us together. We bought our first house when we were 3 years together, and since then there was always the fear of being left alone, leave the other one, and myself in debts. We bought a second home, sold the first one, had kids, lovely twin daughters, bought a third home, sold the second one. But my wife still wasn't happy with life, and this all pushed down on me. There was no affection between us. Also, I was very insecure about myself, thought women didn't really like me. But then my eyes opened. I started doing yoga, went to a therapist, and after a year or two, I felt secure enough to make this really heavy decision. The toughest part was for my daughters, 9 years then. I really quickly met someone new, and after her, someone else. So my complexes about my looks are completely gone. I started a new life. My kids are okay with it now. It was the hardest but best decision in my life. Also, my ex had it really hard. She didn't see it coming, although she told me several times she wanted to divorce. She blamed me for everything. But now she also has someone new. Mutual friends are telling me she is happy. So I think for her this was good after all. Story 39. Not me, but my parents. My parents are Middle Eastern. Their marriage was arranged in the typical sense. They got married religiously, but spent 2 years as if they were dating engaged and weren't living together. I think she got the sense she had made a mistake very early on. But back then, the idea of divorce was unconscionable. Anyways, my mom became pregnant with me. He made her come back to the States. She went through the pregnancy alone, and the emotional and psychological abuse started over the phone. Fast forward to him finally coming here after more than a year after I was born. Mom gets pregnant again with my brother, and he tries to force her to get an abortion, something she stood her ground on and didn't let happen. Through 20 years of financial, emotional, and verbal abuse, we trudged on. He used to beat us when we were kids, but stopped because he thought we might tell someone and he would end up in jail. He used to threaten my mom with physical abuse, saying things like, if he was back home, he would beat her to passing. He always threatened to leave her knowing she found the idea of divorce shameful. Even though she was raising my brother and I completely alone, he had convinced her she couldn't survive without him. Zero contributions to raising us on his part, and she still believed him. He ended up doing exactly what he said he would. He waited until my brother turned 18 to avoid paying child support, and slipped out the door one morning, packing up his car with his things, leaving the keys on top of the stack of bills for the month. She's thriving in every sense, but can't get over the fact that she feels she failed, and that holds her back in a lot of ways. He was always arrogant and thought he would remain forever youthful and prime. Recently, in the past couple of years, he's gotten really paranoid, afraid of dying alone and very clingy. Serves him right that it's coming back to him. She would never have divorced him had he not left himself. What made it worse was that the small-minded Middle Eastern community kept telling her it was her fault, and she should have done whatever it took to keep him. Relating back to Opie's question, my father's answer to this question would be, the only reason I married her was to get a citizenship, ended up knocking her up and didn't want to pay child support. She ended up being a woman who supported me, and when the support stopped, I decided to leave the second I was free of legal obligation. Story 40. A few months short of 20 when we separated, it was never a healthy marriage to begin with. Found myself always trying to keep the peace. He was gone a lot, so that helped. The arguments had become bad, but when one of the kids really started struggling, I knew I had to make a choice. I chose my child, and the crap really started to fly. Then I found out about the multiple affairs. So while I was busting my jerk trying to keep things going, he was pretending to be a family man to the outside world and doing whatever behind the scenes. I can spot personality disorders a mile away now. Story 41. Addiction issues. We called it quits on the day of our 20th wedding anniversary. Son in 8th grade at the time. Leaving him with my wife was the most difficult thing I ever faced, but I had to leave. She made me out to be the bad guy afterward. It's been 12 years now. Son and I have a great relationship. He hasn't spoken to her in 6 years. She remarried in 2012. Embarrassed him badly at the reception, refused to accept responsibility for her atrocious behavior. That was the last straw for him. He's been in therapy for quite a while. It was bad, but staying in that toxic situation will have been worse for all of us. People don't change. If you think your spouse can be a different person after all that time, you're fooling yourself. Story 42. Only one needs to decide he or she is out. After 20 years, it's not a, hey, we really made a mistake kind of moment. It's more often a buildup of resentment and unresolved issues leading to infidelity or some large unresolvable issue. At least that's what happened to me. Sadly, divorcing as the children are about to leave the home is the worst on the children, as they don't have time to adjust before leaving the nest. This according to my therapist. Esther Perel has some great books and YouTube videos on marriage that are very relevant. I love her assertion. Most people go through 2 or 3 marriages, sometimes to the same people. This recognizes that people grow and change, and this is okay. Story 43. I feel like I see this happen 3 or 4 times a year. I'm a rock climbing instructor at the local YMCA. Every few months, someone will come in, typically middle-aged and alone. They explain they have wanted to learn for years, but never had the time or whatever. Usually they get into it, start climbing 2-3 times a week, planning outside trips, etc. When they talk about their husband-wife, it's about 50-50. They typically aren't condescending or anything. They almost always try for at least a few weeks to involve their significant other in their new hobby, but it doesn't work. After a few months, this person has a whole new group of friends, has started to eat better and work out regularly. They lose some weight, and you start to notice they've got a new climbing partner, usually one of the same people of the opposite intimacy. You start to hear their tone toward their SO change. Now they're just a weight holding them down. They're never going to get into shape. They're never going to be outgoing. They just want to sit at home and watch TV. Pretty soon, those two are planning their divorces together. I've been at the gym for 7 years now. So realistically, I've seen this happen about 28 separate times. All the old timers at the gym start taking bets on how long a marriage is going to last about a week after someone over 35 shows up. Story 44. I just went through this after a lengthy and painful 18-month divorce. 25 years together, 22 years married. We were married way too young. The reality is you're not the same person you are at 21 as you are at 45. People continue to evolve and grow. About 10 years ago, we tried marriage counseling. It was clear that we had completely different expectations out of each other and the marriage at this point. She had always joked that she was a princess, which is cute at 21. At 35? Yeah, no. The marriage became less of a partnership and more of an operation of convenience for her. We had a beautiful son a few years before we started therapy, and that's honestly the only thing that kept me in the house. So we kept growing apart to the point where we were almost estranged roommates. Family dinner was about the only interaction we had, at my insistence, but she'd spend most of the meal on her phone. It got to the point where the household was completely toxic, and it was starting to affect how we interacted with our son. So when he was 14, I made the harsh decision to end it. I honestly thought that it was the best thing for him, because the family role model we were setting was not healthy at all. 2 years later, I'm not sure if I made the right choice or if I should have held out a few years longer until he went away to college. But I know that every single day we were together at that point was a day that I died a little bit more, and whatever heart I had was being replaced by bitterness. I couldn't allow those feelings to spill over my son. My relationship with my ex is strained, to say the least, and our son is now facing anxiety issues and feels like he has to be the caregiver for his mom. It honestly fudge sucks and feel like even though I made the right decision in the long run, the short-term pain is greater than I ever could have imagined. Story 45. I'm not divorced, but I'm strongly considering it. I've been married 21 years. I got married young, right out of college, to my first girlfriend. I'm the shy, nerdy type, and she was the smart athlete extrovert makes friends easily type, who was older than me and had had her share of boyfriends. Well, I honestly kind of regret that I didn't shop around. And she became one of those moms who kind of gives herself up for her kids and career. That looks great to everyone but me. I'm never as lonely as I am when I'm home. She doesn't look at me or talk to me anymore. It's made me bitter and sometimes angry, which ironically makes her withdraw from me more. She's a great human being, but not a great wife, unfortunately. At least not to me. I know I'm not blameless. But to answer the question, 20 years is when kids get to be on their own for the most part. And it's also the point I'm realizing I don't want to die like this, alone in a loveless marriage that is just in name only. I have a roommate. Geez, I don't even know the last time she kissed me. More than a decade, I know that. Story 46. We were married 25 years together for 27. My ex was a serial cheat. The children had grown and flown. And frankly, I had enough of his shenanigans. I was working full-time, still doing all the chores at home. I felt like the hired maid. We didn't talk. I was either working, I worked a rotating shift pattern, or doing housework. What I thought was the point of it all. So I told him I wanted a separation, and he responded with why there's nothing wrong. He hadn't any interest in changing his behavior. In fact, he thought he was an ideal husband. Totally delusional, he started dating the next week after he moved out. Story 47. I can only speak for my dad as I am not married and he is not a computer guy, but my parents' relationship ended after 20-ish years because my mother cheated on my father a second time. The first time was before I was born, and he tried to make it work because my sister was born already, but he never trusted her after that initial infidelity. They stayed together until I was 14 when my mother cheated again and basically said fudge it and walked out of all our lives. I'd say my father came out on top there, because he's happier without her and he still regularly sees his children, whereas my mother sees my sisters maybe twice a year and rarely sees me at all. Story 48. My parents divorced last year after about 30 years together. From my vantage point, and I obviously don't know everything, but growing up, they always fought. I could and still do see it from both of their sides. I've always found both of them to be emotionally immature and terrible at communication. So that combination for a basis of a marriage? Ugh. My dad has a somewhat abrasive personality. He's a really good-hearted guy for the most part, but he has ADD that he never manages, and he is extremely emotionally unavailable. My mom is difficult to explain. She's had a really tough life, and I do sympathize with her struggles a lot, but it's also turned her into a somewhat resentful, passive-aggressive, and insecure person. It's a struggle to have a conversation with her sometimes. I think because she didn't get a lot of attention in her childhood, early adult years, and now she tries to remedy that by talking about herself a lot and not connecting with her kids or my dad. So it's no one's and both's fault simultaneously. A bad clash of personalities, but they could have tried a lot harder to communicate and understand the other's point of view. Honestly, my brother and I anticipated divorce our entire lives. It's pretty obvious they're not a good match. But my mom had a bit of a midlife crisis last year and ended it. I guess I just wish they had called it quits when they were in their 30s or even 40s. In their mid to late 50s, it just seems like a hard time to get a divorce. I hope it's not the case. I just worry about them. Not that they should stay together simply because they're middle age. So for any parents reading this and on the fence, don't stay together for the kids. The kids almost never want that. We know you're not happy. I would have much rather alternate between two happy homes than stay in my singular but miserable home. Story 49. For 27 years, my parents did it all. Had two kids they were proud of, traveled the world together, spent Sunday watching NASCAR, and would have a coffee date every day after work to talk about their day. My dad always referred to my mom as his beautiful new bride to anyone that would listen. They worked great together on projects big and small. They would go camping all summer long and always made time for their circle of friends. They had a rule to never go to bed angry, and they followed that rule their whole marriage. They were the couple everyone was so jealous of. Holding hands and flirting, even at 49. I don't understand why my coworkers dislike spending time with their wives so much, he said to her. A month later, my mom found the text messages to a 22-year-old. Not a single person got an explanation from my dad. Up until the moment he was caught, he still seemed so happy with his life. He pursued the other women. She has a history of going after married men. She took him for any money she could get and left him. My father hasn't been happy since, and my mom has been dealing with severe depression and tragic end. It doesn't make sense to anyone what happened. Story 50. A large part of it was the dead bedroom, constant excuses for lack of intimacy. Part of it was trust issues that came from finding emails that spoke of plans to get away to see another guy. She swore it wasn't anything, but people around me kept telling me that they thought she was cheating. The final moment came when I was honest about having lunch with an old friend, female. Nothing happened between us, but home became hell. Everything I did had to be approved, including who I associated with. I was miserable and finally came to grip with the fact that I just couldn't do it any longer. Story 51. My son grew up, was totally planning the divorce, and she woke me up Easter morning and said, "I'm pregnant." My first thought was literally, well, I'm not going anywhere. Spent the next 15 years in a loveless and sexless marriage so I could see my boy grow up. I knew if I split then, I would miss a lot, so I stayed. I'm glad I stayed. I don't miss her one bit. Story 52. 26 years, divorced for 3 years now, remarried, very happy. We grew apart. I worked on career. She homeschooled. The children were her everything. As the children left, I wanted to travel and enjoy life together. She did not want to spend time with me and did not like me physically. She loved the lifestyle I provided her, but did not like me. I knew for over 10 years she didn't like me, but I stayed for the kids. I worked really hard to try and get her to like me for 2 to 3 years before the divorce, but she would not be my wife. She was very content being roommates. I was not. My divorce was triggered by me stepdad's passing. My mom was really in love with him, married 30 years. She was devastated by his passing. I thought to myself that I would not be that sad if my first wife died. I would have to appear to be sad, but I would be secretly happy. I realized that optimally I have only about 25 years of good living left, and I just didn't want to be with someone who didn't want to be with me. People change so much as they age. I kind of blame myself for not keeping her close to me during the child-rearing years. I just let her go off and do her thing. I did my thing. She got so set in her ways that I could not bring her back to me. Really sucks. The divorce cost a lot for me, but it was worth every penny. I am free and I have love in my life again. Story 53. I had given up all hope for life by then and was rapidly fading from existence. I was unemployed, heavily medicated, and thoroughly abused. I fully felt I was incapable of thriving without him, plus I'd lose the kids. I guess his family got it into him. It was cheaper to cut his losses and let me go than to watch me wither away and any associated medical bills. I'm eternally grateful to him for the divorce, but I also cannot be in the same county as him for fear he finds me. He has major issues of his own he didn't tell them about, so they blamed me for it all. Whatever. I know he's still not happy and can't keep a relationship, so I'm good. Story 54. My parents were married 25 years before they split. Basically, after legal issues strained their relationship, my dad sought out enlightenment and through it, came to the conclusion that his entire marriage to my mother was an extended attempt to prove he was good enough for her. He decided the best way to handle this was to tell my mother that he had come to the conclusion that he'd never loved her and only wanted to impress her and then left her for another woman. The end of their marriage was a handful of things. It started by finding out that my dad had to be investigated for child-adult content. The end result was that we found out he was watching it but didn't go to jail. No clue how. They kept us in the dark. Then my dad started going through an enlightenment using science of mind. If you know who Byron Katie is, he is now a practitioner of the work. And basically, after my mom stayed in the marriage for the sake of trying to keep the family together, my dad had found another woman who he believed he was more in love with and left, and proceeded to spend our college funds on her 6 children. Fun fact, she left him 3 years later and took half his money. Things have gotten better since then, but it's weird to think at the time I thought my parents were being surprisingly civil about it all. Now I just think my mom was really understanding of my dad doubling down on the awful parenting relationship angle. Story 55. We stayed together for 24 years and 364 days. I'd say a quarter of a century, but my ex would accuse me of exaggerating. When the youngest went off to college, we both agreed there was no point in staying married any longer. We were basically friends with very occasional benefits the last 10 years of marriage. In retrospect, I should have left earlier. I'm making up for lost time now. Story 56. Divorced after 23, I knew it was a mistake at about 2. I remember signing my paperwork when I retired from the Army at about the 20-year point. There was some tick box guaranteeing something to her forever. I didn't want to tick it. I did. She never trusted me around females. Anyone I talked to, she thought I was having an affair with. I never did, but she always brought it up during unrelated arguments, such as, "You remembered to put the trash out today. Is that because you thought the neighbor lady would put hers out at the same time?" Story 57. Not me, but my best friend's dad. After 25 years of marriage and a retirement vacation to SC Asia, he realized he was very much in the closet and couldn't continue to live a life of dishonesty. Broke my best friend's mom into pieces. She's much happier now with a solid partner. Story 58. My GF has a weird history. Her dad and mom got divorced after 30 years of marriage, although they had been living separate lives for about 5 years before that. When I talked to her dad, he said it was 100 his fault for the divorce. He was a jerk. He said he thinks he was unhappy very early, and it became his only identity, so he acted out to force her to leave him. She was not very strong-willed, so they stayed together. I asked what was the last straw. He said he was considering tragic end or take down her, and he knew that was the line. Her grandparents are in their 90s and have been married to each other for almost 70 years. They have also been divorced 3 times. Story 59. Not a husband-wife, but my parents got divorced after 19 years of marriage. Sometimes it's just a case of being worn down and not able to put up with shoot anymore. Apparently, my father had been bad with money their entire marriage. They'd gotten married at 19 after my mom got pregnant with my older sister, and for years they struggled to